Okay, and we are recording. So we are live with the happy hour for Tuesday, October 2nd in the evening. And Bonnie, how are you since the morning?
My brain is working a bit better, but I spent the whole day, on business cards and looking at websites, website design and YouTube videos. And suddenly it's 5 o'clock.
And here you are. Well, I thought we would chat titles, and you brought this topic up. So I'm curious just to start with how that came up for you.
Well, I've always struggled with titles. Usually the first one that I go with, people go, oh, that's great. But then I discover that it's a popular series title.
So you're going to call it Harry Potter, and you found out, oh, that's been taken.
Yeah. And then so I'm pretty good at coming up with more titles, and I tend to look them up because I don't really want a title that's associated with porn or with
okay, fair.
So I actually have changed the title on my science fiction 5 times. And the one that most people like, it's just not good for the query letter, because it used to be the main character's identity file name is M0U5E.
Yeah,
that doesn't
the
work
mouse.
very well for searches, and it doesn't, if you don't know what the story's about, it doesn't mean anything. So I had selected a title that would kind of almost use as a marketing to help with the query so that they would know what the story was about. But when I was at the Pacific Northwest Association conference, and I was talking to the editor there for St. Martin's Press, she said, that's not a very good title. And I was like, okay, I'm fine with changing it. I am not married to any titles. Yes. But it got me thinking about, I had originally wanted to have like a series title, and I'm not sure whether I should be considering all that now, or really it doesn't matter because they're going to change it all anyway, or if it's really helpful to have a great title for all these reasons: the query, the pitching verbally, the trying to sell your idea. And I'm a little overwhelmed by the whole title thing.
I struggle with titles as well, so I feel your pain on that. Marianne, how do you come up with your titles?
I usually have a working title that doesn't make it all the way to the end of the book.
Yeah, I do the same.
Sometimes it lasts for years. And either something occurs to me or I just have an epiphany about it and come up with something better. Reconcilable Differences was given to me by Elizabeth, an editor.
Elizabeth, an editor.
Sorry. She's well known. Hold on. Why can't I find her book?
Because it's on your desk.
Anyway, she's wonderful, and I just blanked out. Anyway, she was editing my manuscript long ago, and years before you looked at it, Eileen. And then I had something else. I can't even remember now. Probably I have an old version of the manuscript with it on it still. But so she came up with Reconcilable Differences, which I like. It's not unique. There are other books with that title, but they're either very obscure novels or nonfiction, like marriage reconciliation type things. And I thought, well, that's not a bad thing. And it has a nice feel to it. And what I liked about it is that it has layers. So that's what I look for in a title, something with layers. And the Art of Enchantment, I have no idea. It just came to me. And again, it's, yeah, it just sort of references what's going on in the story on all different sorts of levels. But it also has a nice mouthfeel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also err on the side of long titles, as though I were a literary author, just because I like them. And it might actually inhibit my ability to market my books because I'm, you know.
Well, I think a lot of things now come into it. So I find it ironic that we're having a discussion on titles because I am horrible at titles. So this is definitely a whole lot of not do as I say, not as I necessarily do. So I'm terrible when you talk about working titles. With Malice was called the Italy book.
That's really inspiring.
Catchy, eh?
Well,
Yeah.
It's informative.
Because I didn't know what to call it. And the title came, of course, from much later in the book. There is a line where the main character is getting the definition of what murder is. She's being charged with murder. And the actual legal term is with malice and aforethought. That is, that you intended to kill someone and you did it with thought. So that's where the title came from. But it came much later. And quite a few of my books have been retitled by the actual publisher. So one thing that I think is interesting, that's just an interesting story, is when I was last in New York, I met with my editor and my agent, and we were talking about my upcoming book. And we were doing kind of a deep dive on The Hanging Girl, which was my book that had been out, had not done particularly great, particularly compared to With Malice. So we were doing a bit of a kind of a postmortem about what happened. And so there was a lot of discussion around the cover. And we think that they went the wrong direction with the cover, which I would agree with. And I do want to say for the record, I thought they went wrong with way back when they first brought it up, but that's all right. And then the second thing that came up with that is the title. So at that time, a book was out called One of Us is Lying, which was a New York Times YA thriller that did extremely well. And it was picked up by Target, and Target sold the heck out of that book. They sold something like 350,000 copies out of Target alone. So my agent, being my agent, called up the Target buyer and said, I want to know why you picked up this book and not this other title, which I think is a better book. Granted, she is a smidgy bit biased towards me. But the Target buyer had a very interesting story that my agent then parlayed, which she said, do you ever shop in Target? Yeah. Okay. Well, what are you doing when you're in Target? And my agent said, well, I've got 2 small kids. So when I'm in Target, I'm basically trying to get out of Target without spending $1 million or something getting broken.
Yeah.
And the woman said, that is 99% of Target buyers. So the book section is 100% an impulse buy section. People are not going to Target typically to buy books. They are there buying diapers, groceries, other things.
And they just throw it in on their way by. Yeah.
Yeah. And she said, so we need a cover and a title that instantly makes somebody stop, pause, feel like they know what that book might be about, and then stick it in their cart. So using the example of One of Us is Lying, she's like, that title tells me a lot. And it gives me a lot of things. And if I'm walking by with my cart and my 2 kids and, various things falling out of it, I'm going to choose that book. So go ahead.
This was compared to your last book?
Yeah, The Hanging Girl.
Right. Oh, so, then the newest one, not the one before, not with Malice.
Yeah, so they're talking about The Hanging Girl, and that's, partly why they didn't pick up The Hanging Girl. So it was interesting because my book that comes out in March is, did anyone ever see the old Alfred Hitchcock Strangers on a Train?
Maybe.
Mm-hmm. Love it. It's one of my favorites. So Strangers on a Train tells the story of 2 guys on a train. They're drinking together. They've never met. They're strangers. Hence the title. And they, see how clever that was? And they are talking about their problems in their life. And the one guy has an ex-wife that, she won't divorce him. And this is the 1960s, which means he can't remarry. And the other guy is talking about his stepdad who he hates. And the one guy makes the joke, well, I should kill your ex-wife and then you should kill my dad. And then, of course, the ex-wife is murdered and the guy now expects. So I did an updated version of that set for teens. So I initially called it Strangers, which was my kind of working title, which is the title the publisher initially kind of liked. But after this discussion with the Target buyer, we realized that doesn't really tell people anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it's a slight nod and a homage to Strangers on a Train, but, here we are with 4 of us in this room, and none of you were raising your hand being like, I love Strangers on It. Like, you kind of like, maybe I've heard of it, and we're talking YA audience, so they're even less likely to grab a, Hitchcock reference. So we started brainstorming, and in fact, it was my friend Kelly, who's one of the Creative Academy members. She doesn't poke around very often, but she's around. She was like, you should call it You Owe Me a Murder, which is one of the lines that one of the characters says to the other character. Yeah. And at the time I kind of laughed it off, but I mentioned it in the meeting, and then everyone jumped on it. And that, in fact, now...
It's really obvious what the book's about. Totally obvious. I was thinking The Pact or The Stranger Pact or something.
Yeah. But You Owe Me a Murder. And that is, it's very clear what the book is about. It's hopefully raises questions, is intriguing, because someone then says, why would you owe someone a murder? And that, hopefully to pick it up and look on the back copy, or better yet, just shove it in your cart. Don't even look at the back copy. Just buy. I'm good with that.
But I think different genres have different sorts of criteria.
Yes.
I think. I mean, you want to grab their attention. You want to attract the right person with the right idea. But I can't put sort of an edgy question on the cover of women's fiction, I don't think, because it would convey the wrong genre.
Yeah, it can't be edgy dark, but it has to be somehow catchy, I think. But I think it's much harder than people, like if you actually thought, like, what book titles do you actually remember? Like, so I actually sat down and did like a quick list for myself of like titles that right off the top of my head come. Something Wicked This Way Comes, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, Why Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Okay, Dick. Like, there were actually very few books, and in fact, that often happens to me when someone says, are you reading anything? I'll be like, what's that thing called? I often can't remember titles. I'm terrible with them.
Well, so many are so generic in some way or another. Yeah.
I think more are generic than aren't. I actually found an interesting list of original titles for certain famous book. So Pride and Prejudice was originally called First Impressions.
Yeah.
To Kill a Mockingbird was called Atticus.
Oh.
Lord of the Flies was Stranger from Within. Gone with the Wind was Tomorrow is Another Day.
Right, which is a famous line.
Yep. Kind of funny. The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner was originally called Twilight.
That's funny. I think I just read that same blog post.
Yeah, it was New York Editors. It was Crystal linked to it in our little fancy schmancy thing. Yeah. That's where I came, so I followed that up. So I thought that was sort of interesting, right? So I think there's actually very few titles that really pop where it becomes like that is the thing that drives you. It's often the combination, I think, of the cover and the title working together. But I think you are trying to find something that intrigues someone at some level. So your thing, Marianne, about something maybe working on multiple levels, because I know I love when I'm reading a book and you finally get to a certain point and you're like, that's what the title means.
Yeah. Cat, do something. Come, go. Just, she drives me crazy. She comes in like, no. So I just, out of curiosity, I looked up
You're having a moment there, Mary.
Sorry. She does it like every single time I sit down. And Reconcilable Differences was first called Obsession, which would probably be a good title for one of your books, Eileen, but it doesn't really, it didn't in the end. Like, I don't know what I thought I was writing when I started, but it didn't end up really being representative of that. And then later I called it Well Forgotten Dreams, which is typical of me, like a wordy thing. And Elizabeth didn't like that one, and so that's how I ended up with Reconcilable Differences. The Art of Enchantment was, for the longest time, Villa Cielo Incantato, which means Villa of the Enchanted Sky, but I mean, exactly, right? It's not even...
I'm going to be in a bookstore going, it was Villa...
yeah, exactly. For an English-speaking North American audience, forget about it.
Yeah.
Even though that is the name of the villa, and it's just irrelevant. It doesn't say anything useful. And then the latest one, Disruption by Design, is one that I actually decided my working title sucked eggs and I needed to find something better. It was called Coming About, which was meaningful to me, but it didn't work because it's so bland and common a phrase.
Yeah.
And it's a sailing term, but it also just means it's just a figure of speech, especially in Britain. It just means nothing. So
we're walking here. We're
like coming here, going there, something changing. It's like it's in there, but it wasn't catchy. And also, there's like 12 books called Coming About. So then I dug around for something that reflected more of, the plot and the themes of the story, and that's how I came up with. Which doesn't necessarily tell you anything. It doesn't really tell you that it's romantic women's fiction. That's the other thing that's sort of problematic.
And it is, I do think, it is the combination of the title and the cover that are going to tell people a lot of things, because I can imagine reconcilable differences with like a court thing on it. And I would think, it's going to be a legal battle book. There are different ways that, just the combination of the cover and the title will set tone and feeling.
Mm-hmm. Or tell you something more about genre.
Yeah. And it'll give you kind of what it is that you're looking for. So I do think that can help you a lot and can sort of go a long way. So we've started to talk about it, which I do think is worthwhile, is always do check out on Amazon just to see if your title exists. And then the great debate comes, if your title exists, should you use it? So first off, just in case people don't know, I think that people in this room do, but in case others are listening in later, you cannot copyright a title. So you can't say, well, they're stealing my title, because we have been stealing titles from each other for generations upon generations. With the small exception of if your title is a character name. So you could not come up with a book called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by Bonnie Jacobi and publish it now. They will say that Harry Potter is trademarked. It's not that the title is copyright, it's that Harry Potter has now been trademarked. Yeah. That's what's happened there.
But you can use a character name. I'm just thinking about Peter
Rabbit?
Australian author Peter...
We'll just hold here, Marianne.
Hold that thought, everybody. Marianne's going to find a book.
Okay. Peter Carey wrote a book called Jack Maggs.
Yes.
Who is a secondary character in Tale of Two Cities, is it?
But that would be now in public domain.
Well, true. But Jack Maggs wasn't the main character.
Yeah,
and also the whole point of it was a retelling of Dickens' book from a different character's point of view with different stuff.
So you can get away with things. And again, I don't think people here are probably going to try and write a book called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. So we're probably good there. But
what
I do
think Hermione Granger?
I think you'd get yourself in a world of hurt. I think you'd be sued so fast it would make your head spin. Now, it would be fair use if you were coming up with a book that was a spoof on Harry Potter. So if you had like Hermione and something, potentially you could say this is satire, and therefore under fair use you could be using a character's name. But again, that's a very particular kind of book that you're writing at that point. And there's probably a whole bunch of host of other questions about whether or not you want to be writing books with other characters from another book. But in terms of title, if there's other titles, the first thing I look for, are there other titles within my genre using the same title? Right. So, for example,
more successful and popular than I am.
How successful are they? How old are they? Like, is this a book from, like in YA, if this is a book from the 1990s, that's ancient hat, right? Like anyone who read it in the 1990s is too old to be the primary YA reader at this point. So I don't worry about it. With adult, things live a little bit longer. And how popular is it? And there are people who do it, and it is, I don't think it's a particularly good process, but there are some people who indie publish who make their name, for example, Stephen King with a V instead of a PH, and they do horror novels and they do things very similar to his. Personally, I just think that's scuzzy. I don't think it's good practice. So I would not go for that particular thing, but there are people who do make that choice to do. I would not necessarily recommend it. If a book is very popular with your title, I would probably try and think of something else. If it's another mid-list or quieter book, I wouldn't necessarily refuse that title, particularly if you're thinking of going traditional, where the publisher is going to be weighing in on title as well, and they're going to have some thoughts. But if you are trying to come up with a title, and again, this is the grand thing when you are someone like me who's terrible at it, start thinking certain prompt questions that showed up in that article that Crystal shared. So who is the novel about? So is it something, and again, you will see a lot of books where character names are driving kind of what the story is about. What is the novel about? And I think that's a really great brainstorming place to start. So you might say, what is my novel Harry Potter about? Okay, it's about wizards. It's about a boarding school. It's about and you start just brainstorming. It's about love and friendship. It's about, and see if there's something there that starts connecting things together. Is there a particular great line in the book? So that's the example of With Malice, where I stole that. You Owe Me a Murder, stolen from a line in the book. So is there something, as you were writing or revising that was that's just a great line that somehow could raise a question or intrigue a reader if it was on the cover? So that can be another great place to do it.
Oh, what's your opinion of the, especially in romance, I guess, but also maybe in murder mysteries, where there's a whole series of books and they're not connected to each other necessarily, but they'll have a word in common in all the titles, like secret or a play on words. So there's a kind of a pattern from one to the other through a series.
So there's certainly, if you're branding, then there's certainly something to be said for branding, where you want something to clearly be known that this is another book within that world. And that can be one of two things. So if it's a particular set series where you're definitely trying to say, this is The Devil May Care, a Brandywine mystery. So we know it's the main detective Brandywine. And so, there's separate standalone books, but everyone is tagged at the bottom with a Brandywine mystery as a way of sort of pulling them together. You'll see that in a lot of times in romance with sort of towns. So, Crystal's certainly doing that, where everything's set in the same town. So the books aren't necessarily connected or reading as a series like 1, 2, 3, but they are connected in that way. And Lisa, I see that you're on. Your mic's not on, but if you're interested to weigh in how you chose your series title, she may just be here in spirit. The video's not on.
It just took me a moment.
Oh, there we are.
Hey there. So I basically didn't know I was writing a series when I started. So
there you go.
Yeah, and I racked my brains a lot, but I knew I had the something, so I had to go with the something, and that's what we went with. So I went from the Watcher to the Angel Killer to the Warrior Prophet, and it was about sort of what the focus of the story was about. I don't know if that helps, but I'm still at work, so I'm trying to keep my voice low.
Shh, nobody tell. So I think there is that thing around, if you're trying to brand or connect the books, then you're sometimes looking for that. So in Bonnie's case, where that you want to be writing a series, giving some thought to what the overarching series title might be. I know Tony, who's not on tonight, is doing a middle grade series, and we talked a lot about what he might use. And for him, it's going to be a character name, and then, and I'll screw this up, but the Walter Code, and then the Walter something, and then the Walter this and that, so that it's always kind of connected back to that character's name as a way of sort of doing it.
Can I chime in for just another second?
Of course.
Yeah, I'm reading the And I Darken series, which basically the first book is called And I Darken. So by Kirsten White, and I think it's Kirsten anyway, and she and so it was just And I Darken, Now I Rise, and then the third one I can't remember, but it's the one I started reading, and it was interesting. I'm guessing she planned it all out, but I find that the publishers tend to pick the first book as the name of the series sometimes so that people can remember it. So that was the other thing. That's what I ended up using, was the Watcher Saga, because everything else was taken for the Watcher.
Yes. Although sometimes it might happen by accident, just because, like you say, you write a book and you don't plan for it to be a series. It just grows into one.
And then you just want some way where readers know these are grouped together.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of coming up with the series title, it's not really any different than the separate book title, which is, what is something that is easy to remember, that people can spell, that will sort of stick out a little bit, which I think was your thing, Bonnie, with the mouse with the letter 3.
I got it. 5.
I think it's visually really stunning. Like, I think it would look great on a book cover.
Yeah, but it's terrible for searches or just I can
and where
imagine
people
going
find
through
it.
Amazon. I want that book. It starts with an M.
Yeah, or and I don't know. I mean, it would be the algorithms and what Amazon would do, but whether or not if people typed in mouse, spelled mouse without the number in it, if people would find it, or whether or not Amazon would be like, here's a book on mouse breeding and on like.
Was your O was a 0?
Yeah, M0U5E.
Yeah, so it depends so much on the font, whether it's apparent that it's a 0 or not. Yeah.
So yeah, it was that kind of thing where I think it would look super stunning. But whether or not people would search for it and be able to find it becomes the question.
She's working it out.
What if you named
identities because that was a line in the book, and I thought, well, and it kind of has a bunch of layers to it. But then, with the reaction I got from the editor, I was like, oh, okay, that wasn't quite the reaction I was going for.
Yeah, fair.
I need
what if you stuck with your original idea and made it M0US3? So that you had 2 letters that were numbers. Because people play around with those substitutions all the time. And it does convey.
Oh, I think it has a lot of tone and feeling. I guess the question still comes, if I put in, I don't know, that it's a 3 because it kind of looks like I think you just run the risk that you lose people. Mm-hmm. And that's really going to come down to how big does the publisher, because if it's a huge book, then people are going to know it. If it's, a quieter book or the publisher doesn't have a huge marketing budget behind it, then I think you run the risk that someone doesn't recognize that that's a title.
Well, and even just using the first name by itself doesn't really work either. It's science fiction. Why do you have a title called Mouse? Just.
I still like it though. Yeah, Lisa, you had a thought.
Sorry, you were trying to speak, Lisa. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's for, if it's for young adults, I think they're all pretty familiar with hackerese and could figure it out, maybe more so than your editor. Yeah. I work with a lot of people who are, in their 20s, 20s millennials, and I work in a computer game company, so that would be that audience would get it right away. Right?
Yeah.
I almost wonder about that for more of a series title and then having a separate book title.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to call it like the Spy Society, and so it was going to be Mouse was the Weston infiltrator. Taryn was the Weston survivalist.
Yeah.
Jared was an architect. All these different jobs that they would have because it's origin stories of how they became spies.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't work. And nothing works. I don't know. I'm going to do a Marianne.
Wait for
that's
it. To strike.
So, I think you have a couple of different options. So you are planning to go traditional. So I would find something that you at least like and feel conveys the tone of the book, and you can query with that. And certainly when you're talking with an agent or an editor talking about, like, I'm not sure this is the best title for the book. The challenge comes if you're indie publishing, because ultimately, and bad news is it's up to you.
Yeah, and
That's
there's
both sides of the coin.
There's no committee vetting your ideas, so you can bounce it off as many friends as you want, but ultimately they're just opinions. And if your book's not selling, you don't know. Is it the title? Is it the cover? Is it the blurb? Is it something else about, a disconnect between the story and the way it's packaged? There's no way of knowing. I mean, if you're just
and to be honest, I'm not sure traditional publishers know either. So if we go back to The Hanging Girl, when they came up with that title, where it comes from is the book revolves around tarot cards. And there's a tarot card called the Hanging Man, which means uncertainty. And the character has a line in the book where she talks about she feels like she's the hanging girl because she has all this uncertainty in her life. So that's where the title came from. I think had they done a cover that had a very tarot card kind of feel to it, it potentially could have worked. But the cover that they did is it's a very dark wood. It's supposed to look like the cabin. It looks more like a horror novel. So I think when people see Hanging Girl, they wonder if this is a book about maybe suicide or murder. And there is some murder, but it's not that kind of, it's not a horror novel.
Yeah.
And so I think there was the combination of the title with the cover was what really kind of didn't do that book any favors. What is interesting is, of course, it's coming out in paperback here in a few months, and they are reissuing it, and we have a shiny new cover. Ooh. And we have I'll see if I can find it. It's not even public lit. Would you guys like to be on the inside, the loop?
Oh, yeah, heck yeah.
Because I when I first saw the cover, I thought because of the colors, because it's kind of that orangey red and black, that I was thinking, so this is about a girl who goes around hanging people and making them fake suicides or something.
Yeah, some kind of gritty
impression.
I'll
read the back blurb first before I form an opinion.
Yes, that's good. Okay, so hang on. So they have come up with a new title and a new cover. So they're going to do both. Yep.
Let's see what the magic of traditional gives you.
Okay, so you guys all remember The Hanging Girl? Hang on, hold that thought.
See, Marianne, you started something.
Yeah, I'll be right back. Right down. Yes. Yeah, that does look like someone's going to jump out with an axe or, a noose, an axe and a noose.
Can you see now? Hang on.
Nope. I can see you looking up, though.
I can see it.
Oh.
One line too many. Oh, that's cool.
So that will be the new. Now, this is still rough because they have, it's a cobbled together picture, so they have to do some things. Like there's a weird thing happening on the O. Mm-hmm. Right over there. They got to fix that.
Looks like that spider I just found behind a bookcase today.
Fly on it.
Squashed.
So what they're trying to do is then also match up with, so hang on one second here. Let's see if I can easily find this.
So because it's white.
Yes.
Are they not worried about, obviously there's a lot of contrast, so that's not a big issue. But on Amazon, the edges of the book are going to disappear.
Yeah. So this is my new book.
Ah. Oh, so there's kind of a thing going on there. The black
There's
and white.
Thing. Yeah.
And the shredded bits of the layering thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see they definitely are trying to brand these. It's kind of like, if you like one, you'll like the other. That's kind of the thing that they're definitely going for.
And how do you feel about the name changing?
My only worry, which is not a big worry because the book was not exactly a big seller, is that someone buys a copy and is like, wait a minute, I read this book already. Right. So they will have a tagline on the back that will say previously titled The Hanging Girl. So it will say that. It will be in the search criteria and all that kind of stuff. I've asked them to make that really clear.
Are you sad to lose The Hanging Girl?
That was never my title.
Oh, it wasn't. Okay.
No. So I always had a little bit of a concern that the Hanging Girl might be misleading.
This sounds more like your kind of story.
I think this is more, it's the term I'm looking for.
It feels more
Brandy.
too.
It feels very Brandy appropriate. So in terms of when you're looking at some of the YA thrillers that are out right now, this kind of matches both in cover and feel and tone. Like it's no confusion to me that what you're looking at here is, hang on, let's see if I can do this. We're getting crazy now. I am. All these screens open.
In there.
Technology, not my friend.
You can do it, Eileen.
No, I can't.
It's not a spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's not. So maybe I can. This is the most successful YA thriller out in quite some time.
So yeah, I can see where they're kind of nudging up to it, you know, in terms of style.
Yeah. So that's where they're going, without a doubt.
Interesting.
Other thoughts on titles?
Well, I've done the thing, you know, where you're supposed to, I don't know if it's supposed to, where you brainstorm, just
write down.
Come to you. I've gotten like 500 titles. And then I pick and choose and try to come up with things. But
well, and that's why I think sometimes brainstorming, like, what is it about? Who is it about? And just listing like some of the character names, thinking about themes. It's about betrayal. It's about this. It's about lies. It's about, you know, boom, 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 like whatever those things are, and having them kind of pop up and then start seeing, like, is there a way of combining those two? Is there a way of, particularly if there's some words that are maybe on opposite sides, like the lovely betrayal. Like if I saw that as a title, I would be like, oh, that's interesting.
I was thinking about Jamie Maguire's books. She does that a lot, where you got two words that juxtapose, that create questions and tension, and I'm trying to think what they're called.
We need your bookcase to be open all the time. But those, I think, are the kind of things where that's not a bad way to kind of brainstorm how to do those things. So thinking about, like, particularly like if there are different things or something that you want to set up, like, do you have a series title for your dragon books?
Well, see, I originally was going to do Dragon Stones, and then it was going to be different dragon things. But do you know how many books start with the word dragon? There's Dragon Rage and Dragon Fear and Dragon Love, and Dragon Stones has been done multiple times. So I went with Dragon Sense because they're senses.
Yeah.
But
I don't think, I mean, I think having dragon in it is useful, because I think that is such a, like, I think like one of the questions I think is worthwhile asking is, who is my target audience? And this kind of ties in, I think, really nicely with what Lisa was saying. Like, a YA audience is going to know that hacker language. They would know a text thing. So for example, like, you'll see some books that are in text, which again, for old fogey people might be kind of throw us off a little bit because we're not naturally text savvy. But for the YA audience who that's for, they would know it. So that's where I think sometimes thinking about who your audience is, and are there words that are going to resonate or mean more to them than to someone else, can be something that, again, takes you in the right thing. So having, for you, where this is a fantasy novel that involves dragons, like, there are a group of people where I think if you said just dragon, they're like, sign me up, I'm buying it, right?
I know. I've gotten people offer to be beta readers just because I say, well, it's a fantasy with dragons. I'll be your beta reader. Okay. Well,
and conversely, there's going to be some people who are like, I'm dragon out. Like, no, it's got dragons. I'm not into that at all. But they're not going to be your readers anyway. So I think it's more important to pull in the people who are going to be your readers. So when you have something that's like that you're pulling in, and that kind of ties in with what Marianne was talking about. Like, you want to make sure that people know the genre. So you're someone looking for, women's fiction, like this is the combination of the title and the cover should automatically kind of clue you in. And it is that combination, because there's a thriller out now called The First Wife. And it's, it's a thriller. So there's something bad that has happened to the first wife, and the second wife is in the middle of finding all of that out. But you could have that title and have it be a very different book. And it would really depend, I think, 100% on what cover image you matched with that.
Yeah.
And that would make the difference, which again, when you have the flexibility and freedom of being indie, the beauty and horror of that is that's completely up to you to try and think about that. But I think it's well worthwhile getting opinions from other people. I know one of the things that Crystal does is she often makes up covers even as she's writing the book or before she's writing the book.
Even, yeah. Sometimes they inspire the stories.
Yeah. Like sometimes if there's an image or something that helps you, and getting people like, when you see this, what do you think? Would you want to read it? How bad would you want to read it? I think we need to be smart business women in addition to artists. And so spending time in the same way that we talked about at one of these office hours, possibly even just this morning, that's how the day is going, around, reading very carefully as writers and understanding and breaking down a book, is go to the bookstore and, make yourself, as you walk around, like what covers catch your eye, take a picture of them. And if, just keep like, what is it about that cover? Then later kind of try and figure out like, what was it that pulled me in? What was interesting to me about that cover? Or if you're writing.
And when I pulled that book off the shelf, did the summary of the book meet my expectations in terms of the title and the image on the cover? Like, was there a match or a disconnect? Because sometimes I'll pull a book and think, oh, cool, whatever, and then I'll read it and go, oh no, that's not for me.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
So kind of looking at that. And then I think the second part of that's really important, especially if you're indie publishing, where the bulk of your sales primarily are going to be ebook sales, is make sure you're going on and looking at that image as a thumbnail. Because some book covers scale down really well and some book covers do not. So I can't share this. I really wish I could, but I have a YA friend, and she's a New York Times bestseller, and she just got a cover comp for her book that she's coming out with. And so she said, I need to ask your opinion. What do you think? Right? And so I hemmed and hawed because I hated it. And so I came back and I'm like, well, here's kind of what's not working for me. And she was like, okay, I hate it too. So that was first a huge relief, because there's nothing worse than when they're like, oh, I love it. But then we were trying to figure out like, what's her argument to go back to with her editor around why it's not working. And the biggest thing that we came up with is when you shrunk it down to a thumbnail, you can't even tell what it is. Yeah. Like it's a hot mess.
Overly dark covers are very problematic when they're too small, because if there isn't enough contrast or brightness, it just doesn't survive the shrinkage. And in a way, I have the advantage in my genre, because there's a preponderance of quite bright, cheery colors, pinks and blues and even yellows, and so they still have a lot of pizzazz even when they're tiny. So
I think thinking about that, or like one of the things with Hanging Girl, so let me do it up again so I can get it in here, is there's a tagline, which is up here in the corner, which is trust no one, deceive everyone, which I do quite like the tagline. The problem is, of course, like you probably can't even read it.
Yes. No.
And when we make it really tiny, you can't see it at all. So then, because I think that trust no one, deceive everyone gives you more of a hint that it's more of a mystery versus a suicide or horror novel, but that's not necessarily what's catching your eye. That I think is getting lost in this.
I mean, that's a good opening line, like a headline for your blurb, right? On the back or at the top of your Amazon description. Yeah. You could put that in bold or something, and then that conveys a lot of information.
Yeah, without a doubt, I think you can, look at that. But if you are indie publishing, make sure you are paying attention to how it's going to look on the small, because that's going to make a difference.
Yeah.
Lily asked, can a book have two covers? So one for online and paper. So books sometimes do have different covers, and it's usually what you'll see is there's a different cover for the paperback version versus a hardcover version. The other time you'll often see a recover is if a movie is made. So anytime they do a movie, there's always a movie edition cover, which has that. In general, you're probably going to want the same cover because, again, you're trying to associate a brand. So I picture that thing, and then I know what it looks like. So if I see it at the bookstore, I know it's the same thing. Whereas if it has a different cover, I may not recognize it as the same. So typically, you're going to have the same for online and for a print version. It's not universal, but that is somewhat of a thing.
Mm. And
So that is
I've noticed that there's more covers coming out that are like words, just words, and
I think things go in.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a. I've been studying that because some upmarket women's fiction goes that route. I mean, really, if you look at everything by Emily Giffen and Jojo Moyes and Jane Green, and they might have little iconic graphic elements, but basically it's like a big font on a bright color.
Yeah.
And there's whole segments of the market like that.
Yeah.
So,
and things definitely go like this, right? Like you'll see where text-based becomes all the rage. And so all of a sudden you're seeing tons of text-based covers where it's the font or a special font, or as you talked about, like kind of a tiny little iconic image.
Yeah. And how do you know if
the title's the girl? So the girl on the train, the quiet girl, the girl in the window, the girl at the like if it had girl in it, that's what they were gonna, call it. So they stuffed that into every single thriller title for the longest period of time. And now that the girl phase seems to be cresting.
But how do you know when a trend is passé? I mean,
psychic abilities come into play. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell. And I think that is constantly the challenge that you're trying to come up with, is a match or feed into that. But I also think you can play opposite to it. So you can look at something like, I think Crystal has made some very interesting choices. So she's writing romance. So the most traditional covers for her would show a couple, like she does a lot of Christmas stories. So the cover I'm picturing is the girl in the fuzzy sweater with the guy who's got the present behind his hand and that kind of stuff. And they're leaning in for the kiss.
And she might have a Christmas tree behind them.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Or she's holding the wreath over one arm, right? Like those are those covers, right? And she has very distinctly gone against it. So she's gone with the white cover, a very graphic image, bright colors. She's going against what typical genre romance says. That is a risky move because, again, sometimes people are like, I like certain books. And so they're looking for, where's the guy with the Christmas tree? Boom, boom, boom. That's what they're buying. She is kind of playing against type. So I think she's hoping, like when someone opens an Amazon page and it's picture after picture of the guy with the thing, that hers pops out. Mm-hmm. Maybe makes someone look at it.
And I mean, her branding is really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And she's obviously thought that through. But you could look at those very white covers with just a couple of objects, whether it's a wine glass or a shoe or something.
Yeah.
And you could, to me, you could interpret that as being a little bit more comic because it's so simplified and bold. And I don't know that that's necessarily, I don't think that's what her stories are doing. And yet, I think it's working for her. But partly because once you have read one of her books and enjoyed it, there is no doubt at all which ones are her books, right? They just have this really very, very clear and unique brand.
So I think you're always fighting two different things. One, which is how do you fit in and how do you stand out? And you're trying to do it at the same time, right? So you're trying to say something that's going to fit and is going to tell a romance reader, oh, this is a Scottish historical romance. So I need to have the burly guy in the kilt with the sword and the girl kind of bending back. And at the same time, how do I not look like every single Scottish historical romance out there? so that they glaze over the cover. And I don't have a good answer for that. I don't think that you can have a good answer for that, as much as knowing that those are the things that you're choosing between and trying to figure out where you fall. And I think Crystal has made a bold move, which I think works really well for her, in part because she has thought out that brand over a wide thing. I don't know if I have the capacity to be thinking that far ahead to be like, this is going to be my brand image and it's going to work with all of these things. This is where I admit that Crystal's way more organized than I will ever be, in case you didn't know that.
We didn't notice that.
She would also choose her titles to, work with that.
Yes.
That image that she has in mind. So I don't know if she started with the image first or the title first. But
yeah, I think I think it's gone both ways for her. Like, I think she has, like, having been around her process, I think she's done both. And I know some she designed the cover and that actually inspired the whole book. So she's in her own thing. Like, I definitely have obviously not done that branding thing, because if you even look at the range of books that I've written, I have, The Hanging Girl and What Would Emma Do? So they could not be more different, and a 4th grade fairy book. Oh, and some romantic comedy tossed in there. So my problem is I tend to write what I find interesting without thinking about branding, which could explain so many things in my life. But
you're supposed to write what you love. Come on.
And that's what I have done. But it is something, as you are considering and starting out on your writing journey, around, like, do I want to have a brand? Am I trying to set something up? Now, before we kind of wrap or come to a close for the evening, any questions about titles that we haven't yet hit on? The Jeopardy music playing? No? All right.
Nope. I think I'm good.
So that was an entire hour where I actually gave you no answer, because what it came to...
I'm no wiser anyway.
Yeah. So you're welcome for letting me waste the last hour. I don't think there really is a good answer, other than you are balancing fitting in with standing out and trying to figure out where your comfort level is on each of those two different things. Brainstorming is 100% the best way to do it. And being a careful reader. So spending some time going to the bookstore and looking at, like, what are other books in my genre being called? You can do it on Amazon if you don't want to actually put on pants and go out, right? But, like, look up romantic comedies and scroll through, like, what's on there. And maybe look through older books, because maybe you want to do kind of a, vintage throwback to something that hasn't been happening for a while. That may be a way that you stand out.
And get feedback from someone other
than
and
I was going to add that, obviously, if you have a community, bounce it off of them, because you might think something that just isn't going to translate to the wider audience. Which
is, a great place for me to put in a plug, that if people ever had that is certainly something we could talk about in office hours. So we did talk at one point about Marianne's blurb, like about what would be on the back of the book. So that is certainly something that we can do, or a query letter, that kind of thing, where you're trying to, like, just get that. And I think it's so helpful to get feedback, like when Scott brought in his, where where a lot of people are like, I don't know what an RPG is. Certainly what teen boys would know, role-playing game, but it was that interesting thing. I think sometimes we only know what we know. And when you put it out to a larger audience, suddenly you get an idea of, like, other people don't know that reference, or they may not have heard it. So I think that's something where it's useful. Again, kind of chiming in a little bit with what Lisa said, where, like, if you're writing a YA book, don't just get feedback from old people. Get feedback from teens, right? Like, asking them, like, what do you think? And, and maybe playing a game, like, where you have 3 different titles and ask people to, which one's their favorite and anyone they don't like. And then just kind of looking to see, like, are there any trends or things that are kind of popping out? Do a little market research. Never hurts.
Never.
Oh, never. All right. So we are coming to the end of another fine Tuesday evening. If people have particular questions, you can email them to me and we will have a fancy topic. Or if you have pages, we would be happy to do pages next week as well. I will give you a heads up. I can't remember what it is, but the Tuesday after the Surrey conference, there will be office hours in the morning, but not in the evening that week.
Okay.
just keep that in mind. And also on the 29th or 30th, which is a Tuesday, one of those days is Tuesday, I'm flying back from Toronto that day because I'm at the awards ceremony for the Children's Book Awards, and so I won't be here. So you'll be on your own. But that will all show up in GLIP, and you'll get that, so you will know where I am. All right, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Bye. Thank
Take
you.
care. Be good.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night, Lisa. Good night, Lily. Good night, Marianne. Bye,
Bye.
Bonnie.
Good night, Eileen.
See you in Sprint.
Yes.
Maybe.